Thank you so much for that introduction. And it is truly incredible to be here. And there's some amazing synchronicity at work today. And it's just a thrill for me to be able to be here with you. I have two daughters who hate to cry. They are 15, teenagers, not an easy time of life for anybody who is sensitive. But I think my children are also being shaped by the culture we live in, one in which all kinds of experiences and expressions of softness are scorned. We have arrived at a moment in time in this country when it is easier to bark at someone than to talk with them, where people in power sometimes speak with a seductive but false sense of certitude. To be strong is to be right. Social media platforms both reflect and reinforce this way of thinking. The people who get the most traction pack the heaviest one-liners. Vicious battles are waged on Twitter as strangers pummel one another with 280 character blows, and there are no blows too low. In fact, sometimes the cruelty is the point. I've heard some people say that Twitter is quintessentially American and that it is inherently democratic and thrives on the spirit of competition. But who suffers in a culture when we are all reduced to sound bites? I would say all of us. There are no winners when the only goal is to win, I believe. There are only varying degrees of loss. I wrote Black as a Body as a way to honor and remember what is lost when we fail to listen to each other. This book is an offering from one stranger to another, an attempt to narrate something about our common humanity. It was not written in the spirit of competition, but in a belief that there is always common ground. My book is an invitation to readers to put down their armor, all of their defenses, and the hard masks they have to wear in a culture that ridicules us for our fears and shames us for our weaknesses. The stories I tell are meant to free readers from their loneliness and a sense of being out of step with a world in which there seems to be no advantage in making oneself vulnerable. In the world of my book, vulnerability is strength. I'm a teacher by nature as well as profession, and I've always dreamed that Black as a Body would have a life in the classroom. But in the book, I'm not so much a teacher as I am a student. The stories in the book are drenched in history, the personal histories of my ancestors, as well as the history of the African American literary tradition, all that I have learned from reading the works of Black writers, my other ancestors. But the I in the book is a human being who is learning and who plans to keep learning for the rest of her life. Like any student, I make mistakes, backtrack, contradict, and doubt myself. I like to think there is room enough in the book to laugh, question, reflect, and argue. I wanted the book to feel like an encounter with an actual human being. I wrote to appeal to a reader in a full range of moods. And I like to imagine the stories in the book will accompany readers on their own emotional and psychological journeys. My goal as a writer and a human being is never to be perfect, but to be present. And I am here in Black as the Body, not only in every sentence, but in the gaps between them. Don't make deities out of Black human beings, I tell my students. The human being at the center of my book, me, is not only imperfect, she cherishes her mistakes. They have made me who I am. But I didn't write this book simply to reveal myself. Sometimes you hear writers say that they write for themselves, but I always imagine myself in communication with another. I think of the child I once was, who loved books and found myself in the stories of others. To this day, I can say that certain books I read when I was my daughter's age, even younger, literally saved my life. They helped me shape myself and imagine who I could be one day. And I'm not talking about Black writers exclusively. I found myself in Janie Crawford and Their Eyes Are Watching God. And I also found myself in Elizabeth Bennet, of Pride and Prejudice. I came to be who I am, a Black woman writer, in the world created by both Jane Austen and Zora Neale Hurston. I will forever claim them both and insist, in person and on the page, that, to quote the Roman African playwright Terence, I am human, and nothing human is alien to me. The universal lies in the particular. My experience as a Black American woman is inherently connected not only to experiences of other Black people, but to the experiences of people whose lives I can't even imagine. My greatest joy as a writer is connecting with others, particularly others who are wholly unknown to me. Black as the Body was released in the UK a few days ago. I received a letter from a woman in Ireland who found something of her own story in my essays about adopting twin girls from Ethiopia. An American reader wrote to me about teaching the N-word, an essay in the book, to say that he saw his own marriage reflected in that essay's glimpses into the dynamic between myself and my husband. Black as a Body is about race and gender and region. It's about class, sexuality, and trauma. But it's also about the everyday experiences of life as I have lived it. It's an intimate book of snapshots from my own life and the lives of other people, some of whom I love and some I barely know. Regardless, I learned something crucial from every encounter, and I wrote the book to share those lessons with others. Every eye is a performative eye, said the great African American poet Sterling Brown. As I said, every sentence, every comma in my book is true. But the stories in my book do not begin with me. The story of my life does not begin with me. We are all born in community. Life itself begins in relation with another. We come roaring out of the womb, and our very survival depends upon the actions of other people, some of whom we will come to love, and others we will never know. Where is the line between self and other? Where do our stories begin and the stories of others end? I'm fascinated by this question, which is really the question at the heart of Black as the Body. As Black people, our stories are always already embedded in the stories of others and vice versa. The same is true on the human level. Some of the stories I tell in the book about my mother's childhood and her mother's childhood took place decades before I was born. But the story of my grandmother's childhood has impacted my life in immeasurable ways. As Black parents, we sometimes pass down traumatic stories to our children as a way of trying to prepare them for the world. But when does the narration of trauma itself become a traumatizing act? Is storytelling the wound or the salve when it comes to healing on both an individual and a collective level? My book was born in a hospital. Literally, I was coming out of surgery, foggy from anesthesia, recounting to loved ones gathered around my hospital bed what had happened the night before. I was stabbed by a stranger with a knife in a coffee shop. I heard the surgeon whisper to my mother, "She's already talking about it. That's a sign of healing." Even from behind the hazy curtain of morphine, I knew the doctor was speaking a truth I would turn over in my mind for a good long while. My book begins with the story of the stabbing and an essay called Scar Tissue, but the spark of curiosity that pierced through the anesthesia became an obsession that sits quietly at the heart of the entire book. I believe in language and healing. I believe we take back our power and extend grace to others simultaneously when we honor our own stories, the whole of our stories, the flesh and the bone, the rind and the heart. I wrote Black as a Body because I believe we can build bridges with our words and only walls with our silence. I believe that by making ourselves vulnerable, we make ourselves whole. There's plenty of rage in the world and plenty of battles to fight. But I wrote Black as a Body because I need to laugh as well as rage, because softness matters to me as much as strength. I wrote this book because I have plenty of questions, but I don't have all the answers. And I'm betting there are a lot of readers out there who are just like me.